The sound of a diesel engine split the quiet morning like a blade. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of misty dawn when the creek behind my house usually whispered against the limestone, and the air still smelled of wet oak and wood smoke. But that morning, the smell was different. Sharp. Mechanical. Oily. And when I stepped outside barefoot on cold planks, I saw the shape of a bulldozer perched on the gravel like a predator that had wandered into sacred ground. In less than 40 minutes, they reduced 80 years of my family's history to rubble. Stone cracked like old bones. Timber beams, hand-hewn by my grandfather in 1943, splintered and fell into the brown water. 3 SUVs idled on my access road, and on top of the hill they stood. Filming. Laughing. Treating it like entertainment. They didn't know I owned the only other road into their gated community, a narrow strip of land older than their manicured lawns, older than their million-dollar homes. 85 houses. One way in. One way out. And they had just handed me the legal equivalent of a loaded weapon. Darlene Pritchett, HOA president, real estate agent, professional bully. 62 years old, a bleached bob that looked like it cost more than my entire truck. She saw me as background scenery, a stubborn relic she could bulldoze without consequence. She thought I'd roll over. She thought wrong. What they tore down wasn't just a bridge. It was my family's spine. My grandfather, Pop Sullivan, built it with nothing but hand tools, river stone, and 8 months of sweat. I learned to fish in the shade beneath those planks. I helped my father replace beams there when I was 16, gravel crunching beneath my boots. Every crossing since then felt like stepping through time. A reminder of what real work looks like. 87 years on this land. 3 generations. And in less than an hour, a group of people who'd lived here barely 18 months tried to erase it. I should have been broken. Instead, I felt something colder take root. A stillness. Because there's a moment when outrage stops being noise in your head and becomes strategy. And Darlene had just given me the reason to use everything I knew. Meadowbrook Estates had sprung up like weeds after a summer storm. What used to be the Kowalik farm, quiet pasture and fence posts worn gray by decades of rain, was now 85 identical luxury homes with $1,600 a month HOA fees and rules for everything from mailbox colors to lawn height. They needed a sewage easement during construction, and I'd been reasonable. I'd negotiated, signed the deal, and taken $12,000 for access. Paperwork airtight. I thought that was the end of it. Then she showed up in April. No appointment. No courtesy. Just a certified letter demanding that I demolish my own bridge within 30 days because their environmental consultant called it a hazard. 4 pages of nonsense from a landscaping company with 0 engineering credentials. They tried to dress it up in official language, but underneath it all was arrogance, the kind that festers behind closed gates. I ignored it. Because some threats are just bark. But at 6:04 a.m. that Tuesday, I learned this wasn't bark. This was teeth. I ran out half-dressed, boots laced but chest bare, the kind of cold that bites into your lungs. Limestone dust hung in the air like war smoke. The bulldozer operator barely looked at me. "County order," he said, waving me off like a stray dog. Behind him, Darlene and her board filmed every stone as it fell, like spectators at a public execution. By the time the sheriff rolled in 40 minutes later, there was nothing left but rubble and muddy water. The deputy shrugged. "Civil matter," he said. Darlene handed him a neat little folder and smiled like she was hosting a brunch. That was the moment everything changed. She didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as an obstacle. Something to remove, not respect. And that was her first mistake. The next morning, I hired Mitch Kowalski, old friend, land lawyer, and the kind of man who's spent enough time in county courtrooms to know which judges still drink diner coffee. We filed for an emergency injunction and hit them with a $78,000 lawsuit, reconstruction, historical value, emotional damages. Darlene's legal team tried to play clever. They claimed adverse possession, saying the bridge had been in public use so long it must now be county property. But they underestimated one thing: I keep records. My father drilled it into me: paper trail beats memory every single time. Receipts, photos, tax records, private property signs. 30 years of evidence stacked like ammo boxes in my filing cabinet. Their counterclaim crumbled before it even hit a hearing. But Darlene wasn't the type to fold. She doubled down. Hired a Pittsburgh law firm with marble floors and lawyers who charged more per hour than some people make in a week. Tried to paint me as the villain, the angry old man blocking community safety improvements. Offered me $5,000 in charity to drop the case. $5,000. For 80 years of history. For my grandfather's hands. For everything they laughed at as it sank into the creek. I pushed the paper back. No deal. 2 days later, their smear campaign began. Private HOA group posts. Rumors about my mental state after my wife's death. Neighbors who never met me calling me unstable. Dangerous. A threat to property values. It spread like oil on water. I didn't reply. Because I don't fight with noise. I fight with leverage. And leverage? I had plenty. A Rolodex of engineers, clerks, and surveyors who remembered this county before HOAs showed up. People who'd seen these kinds of land grabs before. And one whisper from Rosalie Chin at the planning office cracked Darlene's shiny facade wide open: fast-tracked permits, sweetheart deals, and a county commissioner boyfriend pulling strings in the shadows. People like Darlene always think they're untouchable. That's what makes them sloppy. For a week, I lived in the county clerk's office. Pulled records that smelled like dust and tobacco. Cross-referenced easements. Dug into old maps. And when I found the crack in their foundation, a single conditional permit tied to Meadowbrook's sewage system, I knew exactly where this was heading. An expired permit. No final inspection. 85 homes balanced on a legal fault line. One complaint could shut it all down. The storm Darlene started at 6:04 a.m. with a bulldozer was about to come back to her front door, and this time, it wouldn't be me standing in the rubble. Because here's the thing about power: it's loud when it's taken, but silent when it slips away. Would you bulldoze someone's history without reading the fine print? Darlene did. And she was about to learn exactly how expensive arrogance can get. The first citation landed in my mailbox like a mosquito bite I couldn't ignore. Unlicensed junk vehicle. That's what they called my father's old 1979 F-150. A rusted blue relic parked quietly behind the barn for 15 years. It hadn't moved in over a decade, but it wasn't bothering anyone. It was part of the land, part of the memory of the man who built it. The second citation hit 2 days later. Unsecured burn pile. Just a neat heap of ash and brush left from clearing the fence line, something my family had done the same way for nearly a century. Then came the third. Illegal signage. My no trespassing signs, weathered wood, paint faded by years of rain, were apparently 2 inches too tall under township code. Each violation came with a neat little threat: $150 per day in fines if not corrected in 10 days. Death by paper cuts. The code enforcement officer, a jittery 20-something named Tyler, couldn't look me in the eye when I caught him walking the property line with a clipboard. His voice was low, cautious, like someone repeating a line he didn't want to say. He admitted someone had ordered daily inspections. He wouldn't say who. But I didn't need him to. Only one person in this county had that kind of pull with township brass. Darlene. I photographed each citation, lined them up on my kitchen table like pieces of evidence, and texted them to Lyle. He called back before the pictures even finished uploading. His laugh was low and dangerous, the kind he used when something either went too far or was about to get very interesting. He knew what I was planning. He wanted a front row seat when the fire started. That afternoon, I sat at my desk, filled out the environmental complaint form Brianna had sent, attached every shred of proof, the expired permit, the commissioner's letters, the map overlays, and slid the envelope into the outgoing mail. Bureaucracy might be slow, but when it moves, it's like a glacier, unstoppable and cold. Then I called Mitch. counter-complaint for harassment, selective enforcement, abuse of authority. I told him to file it all. While he was at it, I asked him to pull the original 1952 plat map for Old Mill Road. Something about that stretch of dirt had been sitting in the back of my mind, a quiet suspicion waiting to become a weapon. When the sun dipped behind the treeline that night, the air smelled like cut grass and distant diesel. Meadowbrook's landscaping crews still buzzed with their leaf blowers, that endless mechanical whine of suburbia. I leaned on the porch rail, watching dusk settle over the creek, and smiled. Because in about 60 days, the state's environmental inspectors would arrive with clipboards, regulations, and zero patience for sweetheart deals. And Darlene would never see it coming. But she didn't let up. The citations kept coming like clockwork. Every 3 days, Tyler would shuffle down my driveway with another manila envelope in hand. Mailbox placement, 6 inches too far from the road. Driveway dust. Excessive particulate matter. Firewood stack. Visible from public right-of-way. And therefore, visual blight. Each one stacked fines like bricks in a wall designed to box me in. At first, I played along. Fixed a few things just to make them go away. But by the 5th citation, I stopped. I called Mitch instead. This wasn't about compliance. This was war by ordinance. Then came an unexpected crack in Darlene's armor. Sunday afternoon. Clear sky. My porch creaked as a man I didn't recognize walked up the steps, hands shoved into the pockets of a windbreaker like someone trying to keep from shaking. He introduced himself quietly, Ken Ashford, treasurer of Meadowbrook's HOA. He didn't come to fight. He came carrying a manila folder. At my kitchen table, with his coffee steaming between his hands, Ken slid the documents across like they were contraband. Bank statements. Meeting minutes. Invoices that didn't match anything on the public records. $4,000 a month in consulting fees, paid directly to Darlene. No votes. No approval. No paper trail outside of what she created herself. And worse, an invoice dated the day after my bridge was demolished. $28,000 of HOA funds. Labeled as emergency infrastructure repair. Used to hire the crew that destroyed my grandfather's bridge. She didn't just bulldoze my property. She used her neighbor's money to do it. Ken's face was pale but steady. He'd been documenting this for 6 months. His wife had been fined $500 for planting roses that didn't match Darlene's preferred color palette. He was done watching her burn people one by one. I made copies of everything. Shook his hand. When he left, I sat alone with the documents spread across my table like a crime scene. The expired septic permit. Gisham's letters. The falsified minutes. The embezzlement. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a machine, a small empire built on arrogance, greed, and the assumption that no one would fight back. I picked up my phone and made another call. Andrea Walsh. A journalist who'd spent years peeling back the skin of county politics, exposing the rot beneath. She sounded skeptical at first. Bridge disputes didn't exactly make headlines. But when I mentioned the commissioner's name and the financial records, her tone shifted. She agreed to meet. At the diner halfway to Pittsburgh, she brought a recorder and a legal pad. I brought a binder thick enough to make the table creak. For 2 hours, I laid everything out. The bulldozer. The code harassment. The commissioner. The fraud. She didn't interrupt much. Just scribbled notes and asked sharp, surgical questions. When she left, she promised to verify everything. "Give me a week," she said. She only needed 5 days. The headline dropped online first. County Commissioner linked to developer and land dispute, ethics questions raised. The effect was immediate. TV trucks rolled up to the courthouse like ants on sugar. The County Ethics Board launched an investigation in 48 hours. Gizem issued a carefully worded denial. But the tide had turned. Darlene had been the one controlling the narrative. Now I was the one holding the microphone. And what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I hadn't even played my best card yet. The road. The easement. the quiet little legal time bomb ticking under her entire neighborhood. And when it went off, there'd be no bulldozer big enough to save her. The calls started before dawn the next day. Township officials, engineers, HOA residents. They wanted to talk. They wanted to bargain. They wanted to stop the bleeding. But I wasn't ready to deal. Not yet. Because the road didn't just give me leverage. It gave me control. And control is everything. Tell me, what happens when the people who built their power on intimidation realize they're standing on someone else's ground? The war room was quiet, too quiet. The air inside my kitchen felt thick, dense with a kind of weight that settles before something irreversible is set in motion. Papers rustled like dry leaves, coffee cups stood half empty, and 5 sets of eyes waited for me to speak. I laid my hand on the table, on top of the 40-page settlement draft Mitch had prepared. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about something far cleaner. Sharper. Justice. Real justice. I wanted my bridge back. Not some cheap patchwork fix, real timber, proper masonry, historically accurate, just like my grandfather built it. I wanted a public apology printed for everyone to see, not whispered behind closed doors. I wanted fair compensation for the easement across my property, not the crumbs they'd tried to toss my way. And most of all, I wanted Darlene Pritchett stripped of the power she'd abused for far too long. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Judge Meeks lifted his gaze over the rim of his glasses, a slow, deliberate motion. He reminded me that power has a way of flipping stories. If I pushed too hard, I'd risk becoming the villain. History doesn't favor the vindictive. It favors the strategic. Lyle scoffed, frustrated at the idea of giving an inch to someone who'd laughed as my bridge was crushed. But the judge wasn't wrong. The key to destroying a tyrant isn't screaming louder. It's letting them choke on their own mistakes. Brianna spoke first. The environmental complaint we'd filed had already been accepted. Inspectors would be forced to evaluate Meadowbrook's aging sewage treatment plant. And when that inspection failed, and we all knew it wouldn't be me lowering the hammer. It would be the state. Rosalie followed. The Ethics Board's investigation into Todd Geesham was already live. Corruption would be uncovered in due time. I wouldn't need to lift a finger. The machine was already grinding forward. Mitch tapped the settlement document like a starting pistol. The plan was simple and brutal. A public mediation hearing at the township meeting, recorded, open to residents, journalists, officials. No shadowy conference room. No friendly lawyers shielding Darlene. Just a microphone, a crowd, and a pile of evidence she couldn't run from. Every term was ironclad. No wiggle room. No vague clauses. A fair easement fee. Mandatory reconstruction of the bridge by licensed contractors, with no substitutions or shortcuts. And a written apology, with my name and my grandfather's, published in black and white for the entire community to read. The room felt electric as the pieces locked into place. Even Lyle's usual grin faded into something sharper, hungrier. This wasn't just a counterattack. It was a checkmate forming in slow motion. But Mitch reminded me of the risk. If I closed the road too harshly, I'd look like the one punishing innocent families. Optics matter. So we carved a path through the gray. Emergency vehicles would retain access. Fire, ambulance, police. No one's grandmother would suffer for Darlene's arrogance. But everyone else? They'd take the long way around. A daily reminder of who actually owned the ground beneath their tires. Brianna layered on the final stroke. Utilities wouldn't be cut abruptly. A formal notice. 30 days to negotiate. If they ignored it, only then would I pull the plug. Measured. Controlled. Unshakable. By noon, the plan was a living thing. Thick binders sat like loaded weapons on the table. As my friends filed out one by one, Lyle clapped my shoulder and laughed, not the playful kind, but the nervous kind people use when they've just realized how dangerous someone can be when cornered. I stood alone at the window. Through the trees, the neat little kingdom of Meadowbrook shimmered in the spring light. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, all built on the assumption that no one would ever challenge their queen. They were wrong. That night, I learned just how wrong. A sudden snarl of chainsaws tore through the darkness, sharp and furious, ripping me from sleep. The clock glared 2:30 a.m. The sound wasn't distant. It was close. On my land. I pulled on boots and sprinted into the cold night, breath sharp in my throat. The beams from my phone's flashlight cut through the trees. Two silhouettes hacked at century-old oaks like executioners, the metallic whine of their chainsaws echoing through the valley. Sawdust hung in the air, mixing with the tang of oil and spring ozone. They were trying to bring down the trees across Old Mill Road, my leverage. When they saw me, they froze. One shouted something to the other. Tools dropped. Boots pounded the dirt. They fled toward a white rental truck, gravel spitting beneath the tires as they disappeared down the road. But not before I captured their faces. The license plate. The truck. The stillness that followed was eerie. 4 trees down, 2 more half-cut and groaning against their trunks like wounded giants. If I hadn't woken up, the road would have been buried for weeks. They weren't negotiating anymore. They were sabotaging. 40 minutes later, Deputy Collins arrived, same man who'd stood on the edge of the creek months ago when my bridge fell. He studied the scene with the quiet focus of someone who'd seen this kind of escalation before. Criminal mischief. Maybe conspiracy. He bagged a single black work glove dropped in their rush to escape. The call came the next morning. The rental truck had been paid for with a credit card belonging to Marcus Pritchett, Darlene's son. Of course. We didn't press charges, not yet. Mitch's laugh over the phone was low and dark. This wasn't a card to play in court. This was the ace to drop in mediation, under bright fluorescent lights, when everyone was watching. Not accusation. Just truth, spoken calmly. And truth like that has a way of detonating by itself. But Darlene wasn't just desperate. She was unraveling. Anonymous calls came at odd hours, shallow breaths, then silence. My truck was egged outside the diner. And one morning, I found a raccoon laid out on my porch like a warning. It was all petty, untraceable, designed not to win, but to rattle. Lyle took one look at the carcass on my porch and muttered what I'd already realized. Bullies don't fight smarter when they're cornered. They just get meaner. At the township meeting that Friday, I sat in the back while Meadowbrook residents stood up, one after another, painting me as the villain holding their community hostage. Some demanded the township seize my road by force. I rose only once, my words level, deliberate. I wasn't blocking anyone. I was protecting what was mine. If they wanted access, they could pay for it. The room was silent when I sat down again. The supervisor set the mediation date, 2 weeks. And as I walked out into the cool night air, I saw it. Parked 3 spaces away. Darlene's Tesla. She sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring at me through the windshield like a predator sizing up prey. Headlights off. Engine silent. Just watching. 2 weeks to go. And the storm hadn't even hit its peak yet. Because what happens when a tyrant realizes the walls are closing in, and there's nowhere left to run? A hush rippled through the hall like a wave breaking over stone. Faces turned pale, murmurs tangled in the air. Darlene's eyes flickered, as if the ground had shifted beneath her. I wasn't there to humiliate anyone. I wasn't there for revenge. What I wanted was balance, truth restored to the same earth where arrogance had tried to plant roots. I shut off the projector. The screen faded to black. The silence after that click felt heavier than any argument. That's when I told them what I'd found. Old Mill Road, the cracked, narrow stretch of asphalt that Meadowbrook had long claimed as their emergency access, was mine. Deeded in 1952. The paperwork was old, but the ink of ownership never fades. Their easement for sewage and power? Expired more than a year ago. A clerical error, small enough to overlook, until it wasn't. Every face in that room shifted, shock, disbelief, dread. They'd been operating illegally for 14 months. Legally, I could close it tomorrow. Shut down their road. Cut their utilities. The law, for once, stood entirely on my side. But I didn't come to burn a village to the ground, just to remind it that fire exists. So I offered terms. Fair ones. They'd pay $78,000 for the damage, fund the reconstruction, publish an apology in the township paper for 2 straight weeks. A new easement, $500 monthly for the next 20 years, and permanent free access for emergency vehicles. Because unlike them, I didn't weaponize compassion. But the real condition was simple: no more harassment. No more petty fines, no more code inspections designed to humiliate, no more sabotage. I looked at Darlene across the room. The woman who thought she could bulldoze a quiet man and his history because she mistook silence for surrender. She was half right. I hadn't fought back. I'd fought smarter. I'd read every deed, traced every permit, documented every lie. I'd built my bridge of evidence the same way my grandfather built his, one piece at a time, until it stood unshakable. When I finished, the room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, residents yelled over each other, flashes from cameras strobed like lightning. The township supervisor struggled to call for order. A recess followed, chaos spilling into whispered corners. Darlene and her lawyer hunched together like conspirators caught mid-plot. I sat still, for once steady, the weight of months lifting quietly. When they returned, it wasn't Darlene who spoke, it was Patterson, the interim president, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His voice trembled, but his words didn't. The board accepted all my terms. They'd signed by Monday. He apologized, not with excuses, but with something close to shame. And when the supervisor asked Darlene for a statement, she stood, face blank. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd see remorse. Instead, just the hollow echo of deflection. She said she'd acted in the community's best interests. The supervisor's jaw tightened. The mediation ended right there. Reporters swarmed, residents cornered board members, cameras flashed. And through it all, Darlene walked out, the crowd parting like she carried contagion. I didn't gloat. I just met her gaze one last time, steady and calm, until she finally looked away. Outside, the night was clean, cool air carrying the scent of cut grass. Lyle waited by my truck, grinning like he'd witnessed a myth made real. Garrett, my lawyer, said he'd never seen someone dismantle an opponent so thoroughly without ever raising his voice. I told him the truth. I didn't dismantle her. She did it herself. I just turned on the lights. The settlement finalized that week. The apology printed in the Gazette, stiff and formal, Darlene's name conspicuously missing. Still, everyone knew. Someone taped a photo of it to Meadowbrook's entrance sign. It stayed there 3 days before anyone dared take it down. Bridge reconstruction began in June. Stones from the creek, oak timber from my land, rebuilt with care and history. The stonemason, an old craftsman named Vernon, said he'd never seen a project finish under budget. I told him maybe that's what happens when a community decides to rebuild something they once destroyed. A volunteer day followed. 70 people showed up when I expected 20. Families, retirees, even a few Meadowbrook residents quietly trying to make amends. Kids painted small stones for the path, bright flowers, clumsy hearts. One little girl asked why the bridge mattered so much. I told her it was built so people could reach each other, even when they didn't agree. She smiled like that was the most obvious thing in the world. By September, the bridge stood whole again. A plaque read, Sullivan Bridge, built 1943 by William Pops Sullivan. Rebuilt 2025 by the community. My daughter came with her kids. The judge spoke of legacy, of accountability. When it was my turn, I said little, just that a bridge connects people. This one nearly divided us, but in the end, it brought us back together. My granddaughter's laughter echoed over the water. That sound, pure, free, was the first peace I'd felt since the day it fell. Months later, the scholarship launched, $5,000 each year for students entering civil engineering or trades. The first recipient? Kent's daughter, the same man who'd once stood silent during my harassment. She said helping rebuild that bridge gave her courage to stand up for what's right. That struck deeper than any victory. Meadowbrook reformed. Transparent budgets. New leadership. Real accountability. As for Darlene, she sold her house at a loss, disappeared to Arizona. And the town, somehow, felt lighter. 6 months later, on a cold March morning, I sat on my porch with coffee, watching sunlight turn the creek to gold. A message came from the new HOA president. The spring potluck was this weekend. I was invited as guest of honor. I smiled, typed back, "I'll bring the potato salad." Later that day, I walked to the bridge. The stones were cool beneath my hand, moss already finding its place. A truck crossed, the driver waved. I waved back. That's when it hit me. Pops wasn't just teaching me how to build bridges. He was teaching me how to rebuild trust. Because when arrogance tears something down, the real power isn't in revenge. It's in choosing to build again, stronger, together. And now I'll leave you with this. What would you do if your community tried to erase your legacy? Would you fight loud, or fight smart?